This is the horn that I play most of the time, and I just got this a few years ago. My mother managed to have a little bit of money when she passed away at 102, which allowed me to buy this instrument, and I love it. It is really a great instrument. But that's not how it started. The name of the instrument is horn. In English-speaking countries, they call it French horn. There's really nothing French about it. This horn is Chinese. It's a really good Chinese horn. This one is made in London. But other languages just call it horn, or cor, or corno. What happened many years ago in England, they were importing instruments from Europe, and they could get horns from Germany, which were a little different than the ones from France, and they decided they liked the ones from France, so they called them the French horns. And that sort of became part of the English language. So in English-speaking countries, they call it French horn. I belong to the International Horn Society, and when they first formed in 1971, that was one of the first things they did. What is the name of the instrument? And officially, it's horn. So, back to caveman days, they found that dead cows and steers had horns, and when they found they were hollow, they thought, okay, what can we do with this thing? I mean, it's like a Tupperware container. You can put liquid in it, food in it. And at some point, somebody found that if you cut the end off, you could make sound with it. Now, there's different ways to make sound with instruments, but all sound comes from
Air.
vibration.
Vibration.
Doesn't have to be air. If you hit something, that's an idiophone. If it's got strings, it's a chordophone. If it's a drum, it's a membranophone. If it's a synthesizer or a digital piano, it's an electronophone. But if you use moving air, it's an aerophone. So they discovered an early aerophone. You can also use it as a basic amplifier, you know. You can scream through it, and it makes things louder. But the vibration on brass instruments comes from the lips. And it's a very unmusical sound. You know, little babies do that sometimes. But when you take that vibration and put it into a hollow tube, it makes all of the air vibrate. And you have an instrument for signaling, which is what they used it for. You know, it was louder and it carries for a long distance, but you couldn't do much of a melody because it only plays one note. That gets kind of boring. I mean, you could do 3 notes means this and 2 means this, but you know, 1 note. And then somebody said, oh look, mine's bigger than yours. So they discovered a longer tube makes a lower sound. You know, and they could then have 2 people playing, and they could get harmony going back and forth. So the length is critical, but there's something else about that length. We're going synthetic now. So you've got a lower sound, but if you blow a little harder and tighten your lips, now you have 2 notes. Now here's the question, how far apart are those 2 notes?
1 octave.
1 octave. Why? This is where you get into acoustical physics. You know, this thing is about 2 feet long, and so when I play that note, it has a wavelength of about 2 feet. When I play the higher note, the wavelength is cut in half. And so by cutting the wavelength in half, it goes up 1 octave. Now, what if I try to go higher yet? Okay, that's not an octave. So now what you're doing is you're cutting, you know, first of all, you've got a wavelength this long, then you divide it in half, then you divide it in thirds. So you're getting a higher pitch with a shorter wavelength, and you're also having to tighten your lips more. There's another one up there somewhere. Let's go back to a natural horn. In Oceania, you know, they probably didn't have cows, but they'd have conch shells, and it's got a great sound. But It's difficult to measure the length because it's all wrapped up. But the important thing here is it doesn't matter that it's all wrapped up. There's still a length which will determine the pitch. And there's that octave. Now, another thing which we found with the conch shell, which we will find also with the modern horn, is what happens if you put your hand in the big end, which is called the bell. Okay, put your hand in the bell. It changes the pitch. And that became a very important thing in the 1700s and 1800s. I mean, you could play melodies by putting your hand in the bell, and that will change the pitch. This is where we get creative. Okay, we take a garden hose. Bell is a funnel. And you could just buzz your lips in the end of this. But it's easier with a mouthpiece, so I'll just put a mouthpiece in here. What I want you to do is see how many notes I can play with a hose that's about 6 feet long. What'd you get?
10.
About 10. Now, the other thing you should notice is that as I get higher, the pitches get closer together. Down low, you've got that octave. But up high, they're only about a step apart. So you can play more notes, you can play more songs. And that works pretty well. And composers were writing for instruments, and they would have to write the notes they could play. In orchestral music, Handel, the water music, the fireworks music, he wrote for natural horns. Now they were longer than this. About 12 feet long. First of all, let me see how many notes I can play on this. It should be about 16. Somewhere in that neighborhood.
I got 17.
Oh, I did good tonight. But if you have like that's from the fireworks music. The movement is called La Rejoicance. So it's called the natural horn. They started off, I just have a miniature, looking like this. And they would put this over their shoulder when they went hunting. It was a hunting horn used for signaling. And you probably have seen pictures of that. But when it went indoors, into the concert hall, it was usually maybe in an opera with a hunting scene, something like that. So it was related to hunting. About 12 feet long. One of my most memorable times playing a hose was in Palmer, Alaska, at a Colony Days parade, and I convinced 2 other brass players to join me, and we marched in the parade. Let's see. Okay, we would just be walking down the street, and the people on the sidewalks were looking at us, and they're thinking, what are those guys doing with hoses wrapped around their bodies? And then I would say, okay, ready? And then we would do this. judges stand and we won an award for one of the best musical entries in the parade. I forgot one. Anybody know what this is from? A kudu. Kudu antelope. And, you know, they're long, they're spiral, and they are usually used as a shofar in Jewish synagogues as a call to worship. Some of them, they have goat horns that are shorter. But a beautiful instrument. I just want to point out the difference between horns and antlers. Horns are hollow. Antlers are not. The other thing about antlers, coming from Alaska, I know this is true with moose, I suspect maybe elk as well, I don't know. But they fall off every year. And so when you see a picture of a moose with these huge antlers, they grew that whole thing in about 6 months. Wow. I mean, it's quite amazing. These, on the other hand, are hollow and they're permanent and they're much lighter weight. Wow. Beautiful sound. I'm not sure if this is what they used in the Bible when they walked around Jericho to bring the walls down, but brass. Great horn. Okay, so you've seen animal horns, plastic horn, rubber horn, plastic, you know, various things, and a seashell. So now we'll go to the wooden horn. This without hitting anybody. So this is a Swiss Alp horn, and it's the same length as that long garden hose, 12 feet. It's just straight. Made famous in the Ricola commercials. But it's a beautiful instrument, and again, you've got a possibility of 16 notes. And the piece that I have played most often on this is Amazing Grace. And you will notice not every note in that song is in tune. There's a couple of notes that are out of tune, which just makes it that much more poignant when you play it.
That's carved out of one piece of wood, huh?
They take a tree and they split it lengthwise, they cut it, and then they carve it out, and they've got all these little discs that they have a consistent taper to it, and then they put it together and they wrap it with a rattan. And it comes in 3 pieces. There's these brass sleeves that make the joints, so it's quite an operation. There was a guy in New England, Littleton, who made fiberglass Alp horns, and then he wrapped them with rattan so that they look almost alike. There's a person here in Tucson who has one of those. And now they're also making them out of carbon fiber, which is fascinating because they make them to telescope. So the whole thing is about this long and weighs about 2 pounds, and you can just go like this, and it goes, it's 12 feet long. And there's a Russian horn player who plays jazz on a carbon fiber elk horn.
Wow.
And part of his gig is he will rotate around and the other players duck as it comes over. So I think you can sort of realize, I mean, people say the horn is the hardest instrument to play, and in my way of thinking, it's just the easiest one to make mistakes on. I mean, it's not hard to make a sound, but I wanted to share a couple of quotes that I found about the horn. First one is Garrison Keillor. The horn takes too much of a person's life. Horn players hardly have time to marry and have children. My wife is nodding. The horn is practically a religious belief all by itself. In some orchestras, horn players are required to be celibate, sometimes by their spouses, because they only think about the horn all the time anyway. Children should not be encouraged to play the horn because it's too hard to play. It just is. You mess up on the French horn, and there's just no hiding it. Playing a wrong note on the horn is like breaking wind at your mother's funeral. It's unthinkable. So, of course, horn players think of nothing else. The other one I really liked was this one. The horn is the most divine of instruments because mankind blows in one end, and only God knows what comes out the other. So, you've got a 12-foot horn, whether it's a hunting horn or what we call a natural horn, which they played in the orchestras in the 1700s. And in the 1800s, they invented valves. Now, the trombones were way ahead. They just had a slide, which was quite simple. And in the Bible, they referred to an instrument like that as the sackbut, which meant push-pull. So it's got a much longer history than all the valve brass. But so here are some valves. There's no instrument. Each valve has a piece of tubing attached to it. So if I press this valve down, the air goes through this extra piece of tubing. If I press down the second one, there's a real short piece of tubing, and the third valve has a longer piece of tubing. Or you can press 2 at a time. And by doing that, you are adding length to the instrument just as a trombone would do with their slide. The trombone players have 7 positions. The equivalent on valves is first position is 0 up. That would be second position, third position, fourth position, fifth position, sixth position, seventh position. So it's direct parallel to the trombone. So how many notes did I play on the green horn? 10, good. Reminds me of the test that the doctor gives you on the, remember elephant, car, and potato. So now you have a complete, quote, brass instrument. You've got tubing, the bell, a mouthpiece, and valves. I have no idea how many there was, but it's a lot more than 10. So valves were an amazing thing, and they allowed the brass players to play more notes. What they were doing before, they had these natural horns, but they would have a whole box full of slides. And in the music, it would say horn in F, so you would play this horn, and then it would say horn in E flat, and you take out one slide, put in a longer slide, or horn in C, you put in another slide. So it was kind of a complicated thing. And there are still orchestras today where they play on period instruments, and the horn players, that's what they play, natural horns. I have a friend in Green Valley who has one, and he had an artist paint the bell, and it is exquisite. It's just gorgeous.
Huh.
Really a neat instrument. So let's pretend that we don't have any of this stuff in the middle here. Okay, it's a natural horn. And they would play these like this in the orchestras. And then at some point, the players downstream were complaining, that's really loud. And they tipped the bell down. And then they found that, just like with that conch shell, if you put your hand in the bell, you can change the pitch. So on the natural horn, you have these notes. Put your hand in the bell. You can play a little scale. And so that kind of playing was called like hand horn playing. And in Beethoven's day, that is what they did. Beethoven met with a horn player. It's an interesting story. His name was Johann Stick, and he played in an orchestra in northern Germany. And in that day, orchestral musicians were like indentured servants. And the ruler, the guy with the castle, said, you know, this young horn player is really promising. So he sent him to study with a guy named Hampel, who was like this leading teacher for the new technique of using the hand. And when Johann Stick got to study with Hampel, Hampel said, wow, this kid is great. And he said, what are you doing playing in this hick orchestra? You know, you should be traveling around Europe. And so Johann Stick thought, that sounds good. So he started traveling around as a concert soloist playing hand horn. And he met with Beethoven in Vienna, and in 2 days' time, Beethoven wrote him a sonata, and they performed it a couple of days later with Beethoven playing piano. And I mean, it's a great piece. But, and then what happened is, meanwhile, back home, the ruler was really ticked off. He was hearing this, my horn player is now this famous guy traveling around making money. And he sent 2 guards out to find him and bring him back. And I said, either bring him back or smash out his teeth so he can't play. So Johann Stick goes to Italy and Italianizes his name to Giovanni Punto. And he wrote a lot of music, and music is, it'll say Stick Punto, both names. But I mean, this is incredible history. Anyway, Beethoven's sonata starts like this, and it's mostly just the open horn, but every now and then I'll have to move my hand in the bell. So you just move your hand to change the pitch on a few notes. But that went on for a long time until they invented valves. And when they invented valves, it was like, okay, you don't need to move your hand in and out of the bell. We could go back to playing like this with the valves, but that was too loud. And by then, people were used to the sound of the horn with the hand in the bell. And that is one of the unique things about the horn. The other brass instruments, you know, they just blast out the bell. With the horn, the right hand is in the bell, and you sort of mold the sound to get that beautiful tone quality. And you can also adjust the pitch a little bit if is needed. You know, and you think about, okay, what famous horn pieces do people know these days? I mean, it used to be classical music. Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony has a beautiful horn solo. People don't know that anymore. But where do you hear the great horn music nowadays? John Williams. Movies. So, you know, a classic horn piece now would be something like this. Now, this horn is a double horn. And when I first started as a kid, many years ago, 67 years ago. I had a single F horn, and then when I got into high school, I got a double horn. And the double horn combines a 12-foot horn, and then if I push my thumb down, it goes to a 9-foot horn. So, you know, on the 12-foot horn, if I play like the main scale, put the thumb down, shorter horn.
Yeah.
Now, each horn has certain notes and certain ranges which are more in tune or easier to play. And so basically you learn all the fingerings on both horns and you switch back and forth. The high range you almost always play on the shorter horn. Now, there are some pieces that go really high. And it gets very precarious because the notes are so close together up there. They're like a step apart or half a step apart up there. And even on the shorter B flat horn, it's very precarious. So there is a shorter horn. This is a descant horn. And it combines a 9-foot horn with a 6-foot horn. So if I have to play something really high, then I use a 6-foot horn. And this is an interesting instrument. It's made in London in 1971. It was played in Atlanta by the first horn player there. He sold it to a studio musician in LA, and I traded a horn to him and bought this one from the guy in LA. And when I got it, it said Paxman, which is in London, and I checked with him on the history of the instrument. But the bell says modified by Lewis, which is a Chicago horn shop. And so I checked with the original owner in Atlanta, and he said, here's what happened. He said, I came out of my front door one time, I had this horn in a soft gig bag, and it had rained and frozen, and I fell down my front stairs, and I rode all the way down on top of that horn. And instead of sending it to London, he sent it to Chicago. So they rebuilt the valves, they rebuilt the lead pipe, they put on a different bell completely. And so it's kind of a hybrid horn. And the B flat side isn't great, but the high F side is fantastic. So if I have to do like Bach's Brandenburg number 1 has got just a wicked horn. It's a specialty horn. And what they're making now, you've got the 12-foot horn, the 9-foot horn, and the 6-foot horn. Now they're making triples. And a friend of mine in Vancouver, Washington, has a very nice triple horn that combines all 3 instruments in one.
Wow.
So it's interesting. Let me give you one more quote. This is from a player in the New York Philharmonic. Playing first horn in an orchestra is like walking into a lion's den, bare ass naked, with a sprig of parsley behind your ear. So, do you have any questions about the horn? Yes?
Yes, and this is something everybody in this room is wondering, because we're all campers. How do you hold that with one?
It comes in 3 pieces. It fits underneath the motorhome.
Wow.
When I had, I was going to try to find one on eBay, and I found one in San Diego, which was a beautiful instrument. I didn't bid quite high enough. So then I thought I'll never see another one. And then I saw one a week later in Florida, made in Switzerland. And so I thought, well, this is a sign, I should bid a little higher. So I bid, and I got it. And then the guy, we checked on the shipping, and he said, oh my God, this is going to cost you hundreds of dollars. We had a neighbor who flew for FedEx. And I explained it for him, and he said, no problem. He said, we'll put it on my account, you have it delivered to my house. And so that's what we did. So we got a really good shipping rate through FedEx. And then I needed a case, And I got the case from a guy in Calgary who makes alphorns, Rocky Mountain alphorns, which are beautiful instruments. But he had this beautiful Cordura case. So, any other questions? Mike?
Can you play on other horns besides these? If you just, or is the French horn yours the special?
Well, I mean, I'm a French horn player, but I can play trumpet. My wife is a better trumpet player than I am. She plays trumpet.
Oh.
And I can play a bit of trombone too, but they're all quite similar. But, you know, Glenn and I were both music teachers. And in college, you learn to play all the brasses, all the woodwinds, all the strings, and you learn them all. And voice lessons, you do that. So. Okay, we're gonna.
Would orchestras have different horns in them? Sizes of horns that you were describing?
A lot of it's up to the player. There are some players who prefer the single B flat horn. They're really nice. They're lightweight for the high stuff, you know. And so you might see a player playing a single B flat. You might see doubles. You might see triples. And in some music, like by Bruckner and Wagner, they use Wagner Tuben, which is a vertical horn. The bell goes up. And I used to have one of those. That's what I sold to the guy in LA to get that descant horn. I had a Wagner Tuben, which was fun to play and really loud, but I really didn't need it for anything. So, and he couldn't find one in LA for some reason. They use them in recording studios a lot. They're easier to mic because the sound goes backwards. That's one of the disadvantages of playing in a brass ensemble with horn. All the other instruments, the bell goes forwards. And with the horn, the bell goes backward, plus your hand is in the bell.
Yeah.
So you have to really blow to be heard.
How heavy is like what you got there in the double horn? Because you just hand it right around nice and it looks light as can be, but how heavy is it?
I don't know, I haven't weighed it. I think this one is pretty light.
Uh-oh.
This is the descant horn anyway, so. And there are times if I'm playing the descant horn, if I don't need this slide, I'll just take it off.
Yeah.
And just to save weight. My first horn that I played for many years was a Holton made in Wisconsin. And it was a good horn. And then at some point I thought, you know, I'm getting older, I want something better. So I bought a Paxman double made in London, which is a really nice horn.
They make instruments in Wisconsin.
And then I thought, I've still got a few more years of playing. Maybe I can find something better. And I heard about this, and it's called Briz, made in China. And I'll leave these up here afterwards, but you take a look at it. It's hand hammered.
Wow.
It's not a machine, it's hand hammered. And the valve caps are like works of art. And there is a horn shop in Chicago, guy's name is Baloo, and there's a guy in Boston, Ken Pope, and they work with this really small factory in China to get this horn built to their specifications. And then I found out later that there is one place in London that sells them, and that is Paxman. So I sold my Paxman to a student and bought this with the money I inherited from my mother. And a year or so ago, I was up in Anchorage, and I let one of my former students borrow it for a day. And she has a nice horn, but she came back a day later, she said, "Oh my God, that thing plays itself." I said, "Not quite." Yeah, it's really nice. And I've been playing in an orchestra in Vancouver, and the gal who was playing third horn, she had one of these as well. So they're catching on. And also, there's a guy from China, a very young guy, who just got the associate principal of the Berlin Philharmonic on this one.
Wow.
Playing that horn. So they're making a name for themselves.
Yeah.
Okay.